Welcome back to another video, and if you're new, welcome to the channel. I'm RBC Mr. Rhodes, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how I go about designing levels on a very deep scale. This is a sequel to my world design video, which was the more broader sense of designing, and that video will be linked in description if you want to watch that after this video. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the video. Here we're going to talk about the 4 steps to design a level when introducing a new mechanic. The first thing you're going to want to do is when you introduce the mechanic, there should be no threat of the player dying. There should be no threat when introducing this new mechanic. So for example, here we have the glide function or mechanic being introduced. The player cannot die here. There's no threat, but the player should also not be able to just jump up, in this case just skip the whole section entirely, or the whole mechanic. They should have to use the mechanic. So here I can't jump over that, but even here they still have to use the glide mechanic, so it's fine there. So you want to introduce the mechanic with no threat. Then once you introduce the mechanic, you're going to want to develop that mechanic over time. So that is introducing a threat, and so here player would die if they did not glide there, and you develop the glide, well in this case the glide mechanic, you would develop the mechanic into its full form. Now you just develop it more, using the same tactic of having no threat for the player and then having a threat for each section. And then step 3 is to throw in a twist, switch it up, but still using that original mechanic. So in this case, player now has to glide through tighter corridors, not just open fields, while also platforming. Now that you're throwing this twist into the new mechanic, you can really increase the difficulty with this twist. And another example of throwing in a twist with the glide mechanic is now you even have to continue gliding through this whole section without hitting the spikes, and even there you saw that you have to be able to quickly react and start gliding so you don't hit the spikes. And just that twist there really throws in a wrench, and now I have to use this mechanic in a certain way that wasn't originally taught or shown, and it helps build a better connection with that mechanic and the player. Then step 4 of introducing a new mechanic is to come to a conclusion with that mechanic, which in the glide mechanic case in my game is a very difficult section, or a more difficult section with the glide mechanic, of where now let's say if I miss my glide there, now I gotta fight, I gotta use a different mechanic while focusing on the glide mechanic, and this way there's a bigger threat while using this mechanic. And once you finally beat this section, you have a sense of accomplishment now that you've completed this difficult section with the glide mechanic, and you can move on to the next mechanic or whatever it is in your level. Here we're going to talk about another very important part of level design is having an overall theme for your whole level. So you can have different mechanics introduced and intertwined within your level, but there needs to be, like I said, an overall theme that keeps the entire level cohesive and feeling like the same level while using different mechanics. So in my game, the best example of this is the lake body environment or biome. That obviously this one is a very obvious pick, but the overall theme is swimming in the water and having to deal with managing the breath so you don't die. So all the obstacles in the lake body have theming around managing your breath and trying to get from, in this case, one air bubble to the next without running out of air. And here is where a new enemy is introduced, and this is the first enemy in the lake area. So this new mechanic, now this one is easy to keep the theming of the lake and swimming because it is a water animal, but later examples show how it could have gone a different direction if I didn't keep that lake water theme and needing to manage the player's breath. So let's jump to that. All right, and now here, my intent with this next section is that I didn't want this whole area to be just swimming, which I know it's a lake. That's kind of what you would assume, but I wanted there to be some platforming to break up the swimming and the constant need for air. So I added these air bubble sections that allows for a player to leave the water and have these platforming sections, get a break from the swimming and managing the breath. But to keep theme, obviously, they regain their breath once they are in the air for these platforming sections. So these can act as those air bubbles that regen their player's breath in these other long sections that I have put in to break up the platforming and switch between platforming and swimming. So this creates a contrast between each other, but keeps the swimming and breath management theme that I presented at the start. Alright, now I want to talk about how you can come up with these twists and just more interesting encounters with different mechanics and obstacles. And doing this, I want to show you a trick I use to make mechanical combinations and create ideas I wouldn't normally would have thought of without using this method, which is, I've talked about it and I mentioned it in the world design video, but here I'm going to show it in depth. You're going to want to create full grid of the different mechanics you have, which this is, for me, this is only a select few mechanics I picked out, but normally you would have all your mechanics that you have in your game across the top and down the side. So here I have ice, spikes, slide, combat, gliding, and moss, and you'd have that, like I said, you have that across the top and down the side, and then you just go through and pair them together. So ice and ice, spike and ice, slide and ice, and you just go down the whole thing. And then once you get it all filled out, you're gonna want to block off all the duplicates so you can see all of these ones here that are different ideas. And so like here, pairing sliding and gliding, or pairing gliding and moss, or these middle ones, they're just a bunch. I don't know what you do, a bunch of combat or just a bunch of sliding, but it is what you want to do is just pick out an option. So let's just say I want to go sliding and moss. I would grab these two mechanics and go into Godot, and I would put them in their own level, and I would just experiment with them. And when you do this experimentation, that's where the actual, that would actually be pretty cool if I put that in my game, or that wouldn't work. It's just all about testing out what you could do and then putting it into the game if you think it would be good. And it just creates more interesting combinations of mechanics and more interesting scenarios for your levels. The example for this section that I want to show in my game is in the iceberg biome. I introduced the ice mechanic, increases the player's max speed while on the ice, and also how long it takes for the player to stop moving. I introduced this mechanic using the 4-step process that I talked about earlier, and once I had that mechanic developed through the gameplay and during the level, now here the twist comes in of now you're jumping on small platforms in between combat, and so you have to worry about fighting these enemies while you make these jumps onto these icy platforms. That makes the player slide, and you keep going. And then I even throw another twist in of, this is where I introduce the slide mechanic, and then to take the ice mechanic and the slide mechanic even further, I now have slide with ice, which increases player speed while on the ice, and you have to know how fast the player is gonna go, and then you get to the end of that conclusion of ice and slide section that should feel accomplished. Alright, that's all I got. If you want to see more devlogs, it should be in the top right corner. And I also have game development tips on my channel as well. So thank you all for watching. This is RBC Mr. Rhodes signing off for now.